but how much would you be willing to spend on him to retain him?
You know how when some people make a mistake and then other people make an even larger mistake? Then it's really, really important that you don't make a third mistake. And that would be a third mistake if the Lakers went into this and said, well, we'll up our offer.
All right, well, let's start with the Lakers, Mort, because the defending champions, unfortunately, injuries just completely ruin their chances of defending this title. You know, LeBron suffers the ankle injury. AD's banged up throughout really the second half of the season. Goes down in Game 4, can't play Game 5. Game 6 leaves only after 5 minutes. LeBron also was just clearly, you know, he was playing, but he was not 100% healthy. So I don't want to go too far into what went wrong for them this year, because I think a fully healthy Lakers team would have had a much better chance of defending that title. It's as simple as when your two best players get hurt. That's probably all she wrote for your team. So they have a couple of big decisions to make this offseason, though, and I want to go right into those. First of which is Dennis Schröder, who they reportedly offered a 4-year, $84 million extension before the trade deadline. That was from Bryan Windhorst of ESPN, I believe. He declined it. They asked him about it at the end of season press conference, and he said he didn't decline it, you know, as like retribution for him being involved in trade talks for Kyle Lowry. He just said, it's a business, and I guess $21 million a year is not enough for Dennis Schröder. So if you're the Lakers, Mort, you don't have an easy way to replace him if he leaves. But how much would you be willing to spend on him to retain him?
You know how when some people make a mistake and then other people make an even larger mistake? Then it's really, really important that you don't make a third mistake. And that would be a third mistake if the Lakers went into this and said, well, we'll up our offer.
Yeah.
They shouldn't. The $84 million on its surface was already way too much for Dennis Schröder. For him to reject that contract offer, I think was ludicrous. So here's the thing. He's not a particularly well-liked NBA player.
Yes.
That is just the fact of the issues here. I mean, there are a lot of players around the league and teams that flat out don't like this dude. Really don't like him. He's had a history of locker room issues. He's not superbly talented, honestly. I think the perception of Dennis Schröder is better than the actual player himself. I do think he sort of rehabbed his image a bit in Oklahoma City, which is like, that's fair. But we haven't reached that point where he's like, oh, ultra super teammate Dennis Schröder. We all love him. And he's a reluctant three-point shooter, I want to say. He's a reluctant team-first guy. Like, I think he plays a selfish brand of basketball. I wouldn't offer that same deal. I wouldn't offer $20 million at all. I barely offer 15, if that. I don't think he's that player. I would much rather see someone else out there make that mistake if I'm the Lakers. Like, what the actual number is, I think that's hard to say. It really depends on role. Personally, I think I would be nervous if it's above 15. I really would. This is a guy who I just don't trust as a player or as a teammate, locker room guy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, from the Lakers' perspective, it matters less because, again, they're basically bumped up against the salary cap as is. So if they lose him, they're not going to have the cap room to replace him. So when you're talking about valuation here, it's more what type of contract can we sign him to where if this thing goes really wrong and we need to get off of him?
Yes.
Like, you know, if it's 4 years, $60 million, that is going to be far more tradable than 4 years, $90 million down the road. So
very much so. Yes. Major difference.
Right. And I think it's fair to wonder whether Schröder can be the starting point guard on a championship caliber team. Like, you're right. He did rehab his value in OKC, but he did so coming off the bench in a super sub role. And I wonder if that's possibly the better role for him, a la Lou Williams, what Jordan Clarkson's doing in Utah, versus, you know, you can argue that LeBron James is technically the point guard in LA, so maybe they don't need a ball dominant, like Chris Paul type, you know, right, a full-time ball handler. And so maybe Schröder makes sense for certain team constructs. Maybe he would make sense in Dallas next to Luka, that type of thing.
No.
But Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be rushing to give him more than 20 million. I agree. Even 20 million sounds steep.
Dirk Nowitzki would never allow Dennis Schröder to sign.
That's true. I forgot Dirk.
Oh, yeah.
Dirk,
I don't
Dirk's
even know
not
if
a
that's
fan.
out there, so I'm not going to say it, but you and I know.
Yeah.
You and I
Dirk
know
is-
what Dirk said back in the day about Schröder. We know where he stands. Here's the thing for me. Whether it's a super sub role, you could argue the whole LeBron James is the de facto point guard, but let's agree on something. If you are the de facto playmaker, be it LeBron, Luka, James Harden, those type of guys, then you need guys around you who can spot up and hit threes. Schröder, as well, is not that guy.
Yeah.
So even in a situation where he plays off of a superstar who demands a lot of attention, his game is still not built to being a perfect solution for that type of player. He's a pick and roll basketball player. He's a guy who needs the ball in his hands to be effective. So that doesn't really fly a whole lot with a lot of these superstars who are out there. And he's just not flat out good enough to have the ball in his hands like 80-85% of the time. He just isn't. I think him and his agent turning down that contract was asinine, and I think it's even more asinine if a team out there is willing to give him more than what he turned down. If a team out there gives him the 84 million or more, like 90 or 95 or God forbid 100, I am putting them at the very top of my oh dear God, what did you do list after summer.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Schroeder, in OKC shot 38.5 from 3, but that is looking more and more like an outlier season. He was at 33.5 this year. He never shot above 35.1 in any other season besides last year. So very good point about his 3-point shooting not necessarily being compatible in that secondary role. He is the most notable free agent they have, but he's not the only one. Right. Lakers' beloved fan icon Alex Caruso is also a free agent. I think it is safe to say he will be looking at a hefty raise over the $2.75 million he earned last season. So how much would you spend on to retain Caruso, Morten?
It's a good question. So let's first just walk through what he is as a basketball player, because I think that's very important, like to get the context right. Mm-hmm. He's not someone who will fill up the box score. He's very defensive oriented. He's sneaky athletic. He's a guy who flies under the radar a whole lot, but he's not a guy you can use in a two-way capacity in the same sense as many other players. Like, he's a defender first and foremost, and then he's an opportunistic scorer, which, that's fine, and he's a steady three-point shooter, but he's not a guy you can expect to, like, break guys down off the dribble and then hit step-back threes or that kind of sort, at least not on a consistent basis. So I would think somewhere along the lines of, like, if I'm really getting pushed, then maybe somewhere around the neighborhood of the non-tax MLE.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that seems like a fitting contract for both sides.
Yeah. That's exactly what, I was thinking, like between 8 to 10 million per year.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
That sounds like, because the thing is, like, when you're a good enough shooter and you're like a good defender, at the very least, there's like a basement, you can say, of financial stability that you will get. Like, there's a certain value for that type of player. And him, with his energy and passion, to be honest with you, that's where I'll just put a little extra couple millions on top. And that aligns to about 8 to 10 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, for what you said about Schroeder, like, there are questions about whether he plays winning basketball. I don't have those questions about Caruso. He is that scrappy role player, glue guy, just fills in whatever you need. So I like, if I'm the Lakers and I have to retain one of the two, and especially given the respective price points that I'm expecting both guys to, like, if both of them are going to get the same contract, that's one thing. But I think you're going to get Caruso for probably less than half the price than you will Schroeder. I think it's going to be pretty clear they should prioritize Caruso among those two.
Yeah, absolutely. If push came to shove and you asked me in totality which of those two I think is the better player, and if we include like teammate, chemistry, all these things, I'm going Caruso 10 times out of 10. Like, Schroeder might be more talented, but Caruso is one of those guys who really fights. I mean, he's one of those guys who is playing like he's the 15th man on the roster. And I think to be compatible with LeBron, you need to put in that extra effort. You can't just try to like skirt by on talent. That's never going to fly with LeBron. I think Caruso is like tailor-made to play next to a guy like LeBron.
Well, speaking of putting forth the extra effort, the Lakers also brought in a guy at the trade or after the trade deadline from a buyout, Andre Drummond, who Lord knows have had questions about his motor and heart really since he came into the league. Ended up getting phased out throughout that Lakers-Suns series, didn't even play in Game 6. They ended up benching him for Marc Gasol, and his arrival to the team led to some, I don't want to say confrontation, but Gasol was frustrated by it. So Gasol is under contract for next year. Drummond is a free agent. Would you be prioritizing bringing him back at all if you're the Lakers, and if so, at what price?
I would prioritize bringing him back for one reason. You still need regular season wins. You still need regular season production. I understand that Andre Drummond is not a playoff performer at this point. He's just not. He's too slow. He's too big. Like, he can't move around. But you still need to get into the playoffs in the first place. So it really depends on, do you feel comfortable if you're the Lakers that you can basically just coast with LeBron and AD? Presumably you can, but like if those two guys get hurt, as we saw this year, I mean, that's a free fall right there. So having Andre Drummond is a nice security blanket to at least scrap out a couple wins here and there just because of his sheer production. That said, you need to pay him accordingly. You need to pay him as a regular season player and not someone you can count on in the playoffs. Ultimately, the NBA comes down to how you spend your money. If you occupy a major percentage of the salary cap and you are not a fully functional playoff performer, you are hurting your team. So if Drummond is looking for like $20 million a year, no, I wouldn't do it. I'm almost at that mindset of, again, something similar to Alex Caruso, like the non-tax MLE, and then you just ride him in the regular season. You don't care if he has like an all-star year in the regular season. Like, it's fine. Just go ahead. Just chalk it up. And then in the playoffs, when push comes to shove, you just go, yeah, great. Thank you for getting us to where we are.
Yeah.
You can now play off the bench and get spot minutes here and there when we can use you.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, if nothing else, it can appease Anthony Davis, who clearly does not want to play center ever, really, but especially during the regular season. What
is that all about? And he's so,
I don't totally blame him given his injury history and how quickly he tends to get banged up. Like, you're trying to save the mileage on your body.
It's the same possession, more or less.
This is a conversation for another day, and I saw, I think it was Vince Goodwill of Yahoo Sports bringing it up yesterday, but like, I do wonder if, not to call the Lakers bubble frauds or anything like that, they won the title legitimately, but having those 4 months off and then only having 8 seeding games before the playoffs, I wonder if Anthony Davis is ever going to go into the playoffs that healthy again.
And also, Anthony Davis hitting virtually every mid-range shot in human history during the bubble as well. I agree. I don't think the Lakers will bubble frauds, but I do think it's fair to question whether they would have won the ring last year under quote-unquote normal circumstances.
Yeah. Well, anyway, for Drummond, I'm with you. I would not spend anywhere. If he wants even $10 million, I'm out.
Yeah, right? And it sounds like, let's just get this out of the way. That sounds preposterous in and of itself when you look at the stat line of this guy. I know a lot of people are like, Drummond is a guy who legitimately can average 20 and 20, and I don't disagree with that. Like, if there's a guy in this league who could have a 2020 season, it's Andre Drummond.
Yeah.
But it's the stats are so empty, Bryan. Like, I know I've actually, a couple years ago, you and I had a podcast where I started harping against this whole, empty stats. Is that really a thing? Yes, with Andre Drummond it is. Yes. With Andre Drummond, absolutely is. Look
at Hassan Whiteside, who put up similar numbers in his career at times, and he had to settle for a 1-year minimum deal last year. Like, that archetype of center is just, if you pay them, you regret it immediately. Like they just don't. I mean, Enes Kanter too. You
Right.
could, he could play 35 minutes in game and average 15 and 15, but I think he ended up getting the room MLE a year or two ago. Like you're just not paying that type of center big money anymore, and it sucks for Drummond. Like had he been in the league 20 years ago, he'd be a max guy, no brainer. But the league has changed, and he's just he's gonna have to adjust accordingly.
There's a Field of Dream quotes here, right? Like, if you give it to them, you will regret it.
Yeah.
About the centers, the old school centers.
Yeah.
So one thing about, since we're on the Lakers, Brian, I want to ask you something about Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
So the year that he had, it was very pedestrian. Like, just from a productive perspective. I understand there were lingering injury issues. I understand he wasn't fully healthy and all that. But I'm slightly concerned that he's just never going to be fully healthy over an extended period of time. And I'm kind of dreadful about the scenario of him like declining a little bit just because of the eternal rehab and eternal injuries. Do you think he'll ever reach the level that we saw him in last year again? I mean, I hope so. By the way, let me preface, I hope so.
Yeah. I think that there is a reasonable chance that the Lakers' best window has already closed.
Right.
And luckily they capitalized on it with the title last year. So, the LeBron AD era, no matter what, will not go down as a disappointment.
Agreed.
But, LeBron's only getting older. He's going to be 37, I believe, No, he's going to be 38. No, 37. 37 in December.
Late December.
Yeah. So, it'll be 37 and a half by the time the playoffs roll around next year.
Yeah.
AD, I mean, you said it, like, just tends to get, nicked up throughout the regular season. So, again, if you go into a postseason where you don't have 4 months off beforehand, even if he's not, like, leaves the game and misses the rest of the playoffs hurt, I don't know what we get anywhere close to 100% healthy AD in the playoffs again. And then given all of these constraints with the rest of the supporting cast, like, it's going to get progressively more difficult to build out around these guys because you're already bumping up against the salary cap right now, and you don't have really a great depth chart at this point. So I don't know. It's like the rest of the West is only going to get better. And it's hard to see how the Lakers get substantially better from here. Like, they can trade Kyle Kuzma. That's probably their one best way to upgrade. But other than that, I don't know.
No. I don't even think Kuzma has a whole lot of trade value, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and like Montrezl Harrell, even regardless of whether he picks up his player option, even if he declines his player option, and they rescind qualifying offers to everyone, decline the team option on Alfonso McKinney, like, they're still about $5 million away from the cap, and they'll have 3, 4, 5 players under contract at that point. Like, it's not a great situation.
It really isn't, and the fact that the Lakers supporting cast this year just wasn't playoff caliber. I mean, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope shot 38% from the field in the playoffs. Kyle Kuzma 29%. Wes Matthews 30%. Like, Montrezl Harrell couldn't even be on the floor, right? I know Snoop Dogg was all about, why isn't Harrell playing? Come on, Snoop. He's not good. Like, it's just, in the playoff setting, he's just not good. I think the Lakers are structured rather in a way that really makes last year much of an outlier just in terms of roster construction.
Yeah.
Like, this team isn't built traditionally to be a I don't know what you can call, like, a sustainable playoff threat. So many of these guys, they have to bench.
Yeah. Or, like, at least, like, a real title threat. And I think the problem, too, is that, they're not, like, last year they were, because they're coming off the title, you get a Marc Gasol on a minimum deal, and you get Wes Matthews on a minimum deal. So, like, you got the ring chasers, you got Markieff Morris back on a minimum deal.
Yeah.
Now you have the Brooklyn Nets to contend with for those ring chasers. And the Brooklyn Nets proved, because they have all three of those guys, even if one of them is hurt for a good portion of the season, they can still finish among the top teams in the East. And, you know, we saw last night, even though Harden leaves a minute into the game, they still beat the Bucks. Like, the Nets are going to be the premier ring-chasing team next year.
Yeah.
So the Lakers might not get that caliber of talent in the supporting cast. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not ruling out the Lakers. Like, as long as they have LeBron and AD, they'll be a playoff team if those guys stay healthy. Are they going to go into next season as the championship favorites like they were this year? I don't see how they could.
No, especially not if they retain the same roster.